Greetings everyone, and welcome back to Pep Organ. 2 years ago, I premiered Australia's first organ symphony. It was of course the symphony that I composed, and as far as I'm aware, I am the first Australian, at least on Australian soil, to have ever composed an organ symphony. What really defines an organ symphony, I suppose, is a bit vague. But basically the idea of an organ symphony is the one invented by Vidor. The idea that the organ can be an orchestra, and that to compose an organ symphony is essentially, it's like composing a sonata, except that you're really thinking a lot more in the orchestral kind of realm. Some organ sonatas, I suppose, are indistinguishable from organ symphonies, such as Elgar's one. So I suppose it's more of just a name rather than a particular, defining something particular. But the organ symphony as a genre is something I'm very interested in, and it's something I've always wanted to compose. In fact, since I was very first starting as a composer, I've wanted to compose symphonies, orchestral symphonies. But when I discovered the idea of the organ symphony, when I started playing the organ, I immediately wanted to write one. But it took me quite a few years. Now, 2 years ago, I was premiering the organ symphony at St. Mary's Cathedral in Sydney. And as you may remember, back in that time, the organ actually broke down while I was playing, which was really unexpected. I was in the middle of the third movement, and suddenly the organ had a malfunction, like an electronic malfunction, a very strange one, almost like a MIDI problem, and it just glitched, and I couldn't keep playing because the notes were basically getting delayed and staggered and kind of held. So we had to stop the concert. I had to put it on delay, and I was promised that at some stage in the future I would be able to premiere it again. Of course, also at that time, partly due to practicing the organ symphony, I developed RSI, and so it made it harder for me to present concerts for a while. So we really put the organ symphony on hold, and finally I'm here to announce today that I'm going to be performing the symphony at last, give it its full premiere. Assuming nothing breaks down, assuming that it all goes to plan, I'll be performing it next week on Wednesday, the 18th of September, again at St. Mary's Cathedral at 7 p.m. So that will be the premiere, and I'm really looking forward to it. I thought I'd talk today a little bit about how I composed the symphony. It's been 2 years. Most of it was composed at that time. I have done a few tweaks since, but now that there's been a bit of distance between then and now, it's great to look back at the compositional process and just discuss how I actually do compose music. I don't tend to, in the past I was a bit hesitant to share my kind of tricks, but at this stage I think it's actually more interesting for you to actually talk about how I composed a symphony for the organ. So my compositional process is practically the same for everything I write, and it's pretty simple. I don't think there's a huge complicated art to composition. You just need to start with a really solid melody, and you work from the melody to construct the harmonies and to construct all the other aspects. For me, pretty much all music is about melodic transformation. The melody sort of having an adventure, sort of in that romantic sonata style, but also the way that a melody can sort of use the intervals within it to create interesting harmonies, to create counter melodies, to create all sorts of different things. I think that's really sort of the essence of music. And even when I listen to things like Bach or fugues, polyphony, to me it's always still a very melodic process if it's a good piece of music. The top line, which is what everyone is listening to, the top line is essentially the melody. And even if it's some kind of polyphonic work, the melody should still be very attractive and very interesting, and quite often Bach does this in his fugues, especially the successful ones. So for me, melody is actually kind of a globally applicable concept. I think it only kind of breaks down when it's more of a rhythmic piece or something that's a bit more sort of gestural rather than strictly just presenting a melody. So I always start with the melody first, and then from there the piece kind of just, I really trust my intuition to let it kind of intuitively construct itself. I really don't have too much more process beyond that. The one thing I will say is that I don't have a plan. When I write out an organ symphony, I don't have the plan for exactly what everything's going to be. In fact, I still might not until I'm writing the very last note. So I really let it progress organically. I do kind of go linearly. Essentially, it's from the start of the piece to the end. I really think that's the best way to compose because that's the way that people are going to encounter the music. They're going to listen to it that way. And so when I perform and I compose, I actually play it through from the start to the finish to really make sure that the listening experience is satisfactory. And you have to really try and distance yourself from the intricacies of something that you like to really think about, is this an effective piece of music? It's tricky because, composing, just like performing, you can get so obsessed with details that you kind of forget the bigger picture. So when I do compose, actually, I do try and do it quickly. The main melodic ideas and the structures of the piece, they actually tend to formulate themselves very quickly, sort of within a few hours of composing. The details, such as the exact figurations of the accompaniment, the sort of maybe some changing a few notes in the melody, that does happen later. But very much the structure and the core of the work is composed very quickly. And I think that's the best way, for me at least. It kind of just gives it a very fresh feel for me. I think that if I overthink it, it does start to get complicated. It starts to lose its kind of initial charm. I think that a lot of my composition does come from improvisation, so it does need to have that organic and spontaneous sound to keep it interesting as well, and to stop me from overthinking it. Now, the Organ Symphony that I've composed has 4 movements. It's very much laid out in sort of a romantic framework, if that makes sense, essentially, but it does harmonically push the boundaries beyond what a romantic work would have been. I do hasten to box in my compositional style. I do take inspiration from all sorts of different composers, but I do, looking back at this symphony, I can at least say who I was inspired by when I wrote this work, and it wasn't one person, it was many composers and many different genres. So my influences, because I do believe, by the way, that composition might be an original process, but the originality comes from the synthesis of what you've heard in the past, former composers, hearing different motifs and ideas, and eventually absorbing them to the point that you can make them your own, or combine them together to make something new. That's what every composer did in the past. That's exactly what originality actually is. There's no such thing as just making something up out of nothing. Everything does actually come from somewhere, and most of the time it does come from previous composers and their efforts, and that's why we see a kind of a natural progression throughout the centuries from the Baroque to the classical to the Romantic. It's a natural cycle that people kind of take inspiration from whoever's at the cutting edge and pushes it further. So I'm trying to do the same thing. I'm trying to bring something new to the organ as well. So I'll tell you a little bit about my influences. So the influences of my work included Rega, Elgar, Howells, Sarabji, Tchaikovsky, Prokofiev, Holst, and I was also thinking about this, also Mendelssohn. So a wide range of different composers, mostly Romantic era. There are also, as you can see, some more modern influences. Herbert Howells, I absolutely love his compositional style, and I wanted to use, not deliberately, but I really love using his kind of elements and themes and ideas. Sarabji is an interesting choice for me because I discovered Sarabji while I was just before I started composing the symphony, and it really did inspire me immensely. I just thought his music is incredible. I don't think any of it is actually, very much of it is actually good music, but the ideas within it are very fascinating. And I know that Sarabji himself composed organ symphonies and composed some organ music. I didn't take any inspiration from any of that. Firstly, because it's actually, I didn't actually get to listen to any of it. It's not very accessible. I don't know if there's actually a recording online of one of the whole symphonies, I think just one short movement, or the ending of one of them. So I took more inspiration actually from his nocturnes, his piano music, which is where he really does shine. And I actually wanted to use that kind of idea, some of the kind of the stasis of it, the ambience of it, and of the sound and some of the chords. I actually wanted to really use that in the symphony, in the second movement. Second movements for me are a really interesting kind of topic because a lot of the time they end up being really boring. They're the slow movement, right? You've had a grand first movement, which is usually quite often the best one. then you get to the second movement and suddenly all the momentum is gone. And you need to find a way to make the second movement remain interesting. So for me, what I've done with the second movement is I basically made it slow with a very romantic kind of melody. But in the middle of it, once you've got through that melody, it's sort of come to the end of its course, there's usually would be a second or sort of a B section. And for me, that turns into a sort of Sarabji style, almost like a nocturne or some kind of ambient, it's hard to describe, sort of a static section, which is more of a progression of kind of intensity rather than so much melodic content. It's a progression of melody and sort of just increasingly more dense harmonies. It's really fascinating, I think, to have composed it, and I'm really proud of how I did it. I don't know how I did it. I don't think it's really my typical style, but that was why I really enjoyed composing this symphony, where I got to push my limits just a little bit with some things like that. Sorry about that, bit of a detour on the road. So that was the second movement. Now the third movement is a scherzo, which is very much in the romantic style, in terms of being fast, being exciting, really trying to just push some of the virtuosic elements of the organ as well. Though in the middle, I do bring out a bit more playfulness. The scherzo is of course a playful movement, and so the second section does introduce some very fun rhythms and fun kind of, I suppose just some fun melodic ideas and some rhythmic ideas that are basically perhaps a little bit more on the theatrical side, though not really going beyond, still staying within the genre very much so of an organ symphony, but perhaps something that we don't hear in the repertoire too often. And then finally, the fourth movement is a finale, a grand finale. Makes use of the tubas at the end. Good fun, and actually harmonically very simple, the last movement. So it does give you quite a wide range of different music within the one genre, within the one symphony, but it should hopefully all come together. So, as I said, the Organ Symphony will be premiered on the 18th of September. I'll hopefully record some of it as well if you can't attend in person. But thanks for watching.